Alright guys, welcome everybody to the Ins and Outs of Islam. My name is Kai. I will be your mediator for tonight. Before we start, I just want to give a big thanks to everyone here for coming, especially, people from both sides. It looks like we've got a pretty good distribution of people here. There's no partitions between the sitting arrangements as well, so it looks pretty good. Before we start as well, I just want to kind of take a moment to appreciate the fact that this is happening, Such, I don't want to say diametrically opposed views, but definitely opposing views, being able to, especially in this point in time, come together for an event like this and simply discuss and have an open, rational discourse, regardless of what any of the panelists' views are or what your views are personally. This is how we move forward. And so I want to thank everyone from MSA, everyone from UA, and everyone who's joining us tonight for coming. I hope you all enjoy the hours to come, and I might let the panelists introduce themselves. Have we got a slide up? Alright, I'll start with Zarwa.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I don't know if I should thank the MSA for putting me on this panel, deeming me capable to represent them, or if I should hate them because I don't think I am capable. But I think, I keep on thinking back to a few weeks ago when this collaboration was in the talks, and I remember suggesting it, I just put it out there, hey, why don't we have like a panel between, Muslims and ex-Muslims, because they're having their conversations, but, with their own set of groups. So why don't we have one when we come together and, we talk about them and we can actually engage with them. I didn't realize I dug my own grave when, Irfan said, okay, now you have to be on the panel. That's exactly what he said, you're going to be on the panel. And, well, here I am, a few weeks later, so I don't know if I should, how I should take this situation. But nevertheless, I suggested this because I thought, like I said, each camp has its own, claims that it makes to their own audiences. And a lot of times when the opposite camp listens to them, right, there's a lot of objections, there's a lot of points we want to raise, but we're unable to do so because there's not a common platform. So my intention, or hopefully that's what I seek from this event, that hopefully we're able to, of course we can talk about our experiences, but we can actually move a bit further considering we're in this academic setting, and maybe perhaps examine the reasons that, other reasons as well that we use to come to our conclusions, and if they're valid reasons, if they're valid principles that we're using, are we being fair in our decisions?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rafael, also known as Raf, also known as the Italian Revert, also known mistakenly as that Lebanese guy. I'm actually not Lebanese at all, for anyone here. I'm a genuine convert to Islam, or revert to Islam. Basically, yeah, Zarwa articulated that all so well and so much better than I could. But the first thing that I really wanted to get through to everyone is, before I concede that I am certainly not qualified as well to speak on here in an academic panel, you'll find that I'm much less articulate probably than everyone else on here. But I don't think that it's going to happen in a way tonight between any discussion, any discourse, any debates where I'm just going to throw off my thought and be like, yo, I'm an atheist. And I don't think that, the two ladies on my right are going to be HAFists tomorrow. I think that it's about you guys here who come here asking genuine questions and wanting to, basically understand something with both discourses presented to you and both ideologies presented to you. And I just hope that all of you come in here today with a clean slate and ready to listen and ready to understand what each person on either side of the panel is saying, bearing that in mind.
Hello everyone, so my name is Lisa, and I'm the president of UA. The main reason why I wanted to have this event is because in today's society we struggle with understanding how we can, Islam. We struggle with critiquing Islam, or this idea that if critiquing Islam is seen as racism. And a lot of people struggle to differentiate between the two. And since the story of ex-Muslims is something I'm very passionate about, and I want to bring their stories to light, I thought that coming here and giving everyone an opportunity to explain their stories is a very good way to separate the idea that criticizing Islam is associated with race. And so, yeah, I really feel like this is a really good environment to show that. And yeah, thank you again for everyone for coming.
Hi everyone, I'm Sabeena, and I'm 23, originally from Pakistan, and I'm a former Muslim. I left Islam approximately 2.5 years ago. Probably just blanket statement, I'm not here to convert any of you to becoming atheists, and I highly doubt that after tonight that I'll be reverting back to Islam. But I guess one of the main things that I want to do and why I'm taking part in this event today is because I want to contribute to normalizing this dissent, specifically in Islam. You can't deny that a lot of people questioning their faith today experience ostracization, even especially in a religion such as Islam. Like, this goes beyond the real life consequences of disownment from family or the ostracization from friends in the local community, but even the treatment of apostasy in law. For many people, including myself, it's been an isolating process to question your faith, meaning you're going through multiple sources trying to find the correct answer or the answer with which you most agree. And everyone you speak to, an imam, a priest, a copy of the God Delusion, has their own bias and wants you to come to their side. So that's one of my main points, is to create visibility. I guess the other thing that I do want to achieve by speaking here is to debunk a lot of stereotypes made about people who leave religion, specifically people who leave Islam. Yeah.
Alright, cool guys. So just a quick few things about how tonight will work. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to change anything. But I believe we will be doing 5 questions to the panelists. Each panelist is happy to take as long as they want to respond. I will probably try to cut down on any rambling if we notice it. So we're probably going to sit between 2 and 5 minutes for the responses. Other than that, after each panelist responds to the question, I want to leave this fairly open. This isn't a formalized debate. It's going to be fairly flexible, open discussion. So if either side or either person wants to ask a follow-up question to the person who just responded to the asked question by myself, please do. I encourage it. This is type of open format dialogues, how we really flesh out ideas and come to the best conclusions. Following that, we'll probably have a question time from the audience to our panelists, and that will be about it. Pretty simple. Keep it nice and concise, and we'll go from there, guys. So we might open it up with the first question. So the first question to you guys is, what were the main reasons that brought you to where you are today in regards to Islam and in regards to religion? I might start with Zarwa. If you want to cover that.
Okay, so I think my journey to Islam is quite short because I was born Muslim, but I guess I could talk about how I guess became convinced or where I'm today. So my background, I was born a Muslim to Pakistani parents. I was born in Pakistan, but we left the country when I was around 3 months. So most of my childhood and my upbringing has been in the States and in Australia. So leaving a country in which Islam is the majority religion to come to the States and Australia where it's not, and it's under a lot of scrutiny as well, it kind of magnified the differences that I had that I was brought up with. So whether that's the parent differences of the way of dress and the way of behaviors as well, along with the theological differences as well. So definitely as I grew up, I had to consider why. The thoughts in my mind were always, okay, why do I do what I do? But they weren't that pressing until, I would say, 15, 16. I think that's when, a lot of people start thinking a bit more deeply about, things like purpose and how do we know that we're not being biased in what we're following? Are we following just because of upbringing? Or are we being, is this a rational personal decision that we're making? So around that time, that's when I started being more critical and asking myself more questions. And I think a lot of it, so I would say, I wouldn't use it as spiritual, but my own personal connection with God, that's always been present. Definitely there was lows and highs throughout, but I would say that around 15, 16, that's when it became more prominent. That's when I decided to be more serious with my conviction. And then alongside with that, I had the rational and logical decisions as well. I think what kind of prompted all of this usually I don't, like, this is not something I've ever thought about, like what actually made me, more practicing or whatnot, but for the purposes of this event, actually I'd sit down and think, okay, like, let's trace this down. So I would kind of point it to when my parents would take us back to Pakistan to visit family, and just seeing the people over there, seeing, I guess, the living standards, which was quite poor, seeing those sort of people live, but yet still be content and have that gratitude towards God, it just made me, examine my own relationship with God, especially in our society where the people that I've surrounded myself with, every small thing is seen as a, like, deterrent from God, like, oh, why would God do this? Or like, God's not really important in my life. So it's just seeing, like, the opposite side of where people have such a, I guess, close relationship despite their living standards. I mean, we could talk about this, as we go into that, like, why is that the case? But just seeing that kind of made me question, like, okay, that's something that I really value, and that's something I don't have at the moment. So that's something that I've always tried working with. And then with that, as I grew older, it wasn't like a one-day thing where I would think, okay, now I'm more religious, but it was more so like, okay, seeing inconsistencies in my own behaviors and asking myself, why are these there? Am I being a hypocrite? Alongside with that, like I said, seeing all the differences that I grew up with in our society, wearing Islamic traditional clothing and that sort of stuff, I think it just made me question, okay, what if I'm just a Muslim because my parents were Muslim? So I had to kind of start from scratch and ask myself, okay, why do I believe what I believe? And what do I believe regardless of, whoever or whatever is around me? So at that, like, with that thought process, I said to myself, okay, one thing that I can't deny, or just I have to believe that's, like, very important for me, is that, okay, there must be some sort of a, deity or some sort of a reason or cause behind everything I see. So that's something that was a starting point, right? And then naturally that allowed, that led to certain attributes being given to that deity, right? So that ruled out a few options that were there. So, like, long story short, it was pretty much, thinking about what I believe in and critiquing that and trying to arrive at principles which, I need to stick to, and then where do I go from there? So with that, I, grew in my conviction with Islam, and that's pretty much my journey. It's not going to be as exciting as the other ones, but.
Awesome. We'll pass on to Rafael.
So I think I'm quite unique in the sense that I was born into a family, one of the first families where the sort of modern age new atheism, hard naturalist view of the world was actually quite firmly implanted for several generations. So basically, I'm fourth generation, well, I'm not atheist, but my dad is third generation atheist, and I inherited a family of skepticism and disbelief in what my father called from a very young age when he was discussing religion with me, fairy tales and mythology. So I remember, we had to go to scripture class. I ended up going to Catholic school. My mum actually got me baptized so she could send me to a Catholic school because she thought Catholic schools were better. My grandmother is Catholic too, but I don't think she cared that much about that. So I remember sitting there in scripture class and being very, very, very critical of anything that was ever being said to me. I'm like, well, what's your evidence for that? What's your basis for this? And this very sort of harsh postmodernism where every single proposition that's made just has the ground torn from underneath it, and you end up plowing your way all the way back. And I plowed everything back to the fact that nothing existed besides the natural world. I was, in spite of that, very interested in spirituality and very interested in, I was like a little Orientalist boy. So I may not look it, but I'm actually like a pretty typical middle-class white guy. And like a lot of middle-class white men throughout the ages, we have an idea of Orientalism. And I was certainly very fascinated with like Chinese history, Middle Eastern history, Jewish history, Turkish history, and I just became obsessed with all of this. And Islam, when I was about 12, 13 years old, I stumbled across Islam. And my first impression with Islam was, wow, this is beautiful. Not in the sense of its teachings, but more so the symbols surrounding it, the dress surrounding it. It was very, something grabbed me about it. And I remember reading a textbook that I found from one of the libraries at school. And it had a chapter called The Islamic World to 1600, and I remember reading that, and I just couldn't stop reading it over and over again. I can't explain to this day why, But I had memorized that chapter of the textbook because I just couldn't stop reading it, and something was pulling me towards reading that textbook over and over again. Anyway, after that, I ordered my dad, basically he's a librarian, to commission every single book on Islam that he could find, because I just wanted to read it. And I was like insatiable. I couldn't stop reading things about Islam. And I couldn't explain my fascination to people, but I'd just walk around and be like, oh, hey mom, do you know Allah is just the Arabic word for God? I'm 12 years old, and my mom was like, thanks man. Thank you for that. And so that was basically my experience. Anyway, when I went to high school just up the road here actually, at a Catholic school called Muslim College. And it was an environment very distant from Islam, and basically probably the polar opposite you could find. Everyone was kind of atheist, and the big culture was drinking, girls, alcohol, music festivals. Music festivals are actually my least favorite thing in existence thus far, by the way. I hate it. I remember going to a music festival when I was like 16 and thinking like, I just want to be at home with a book. Like, this is terrible, it's too loud. So I was kind of in that culture, but as I just mentioned through that, I wasn't fully into it. Like there were some problems that I had, especially with the way that men in that culture spoke about women. And I won't use the terminology they use, but it was the most disgusting objectification of women that I have experienced. And I had not experienced, any other people, whether it be Christians, because I did know quite a few, like evangelical Christians at the time, some of my extended family, Muslims. I knew quite a few Orthodox Jews. No one objectified women like these guys did. These guys raised in secular families, and I'm not saying obviously that secular, don't get alarmed, like I'm not saying that secularism leads to objectification of women, but it's certainly something that we can all say is prevalent in contemporary culture and today. Women are objectified and not held to the same standards as men in that sense. So when I was about 18, I was preparing for an exam. And I remember sitting there preparing for an exam, and all of a sudden, the day before my trial exams, I actually underwent like a really random medical incident. I'm not going to go into the details, but it was, people who know me are laughing, so hopefully that's enough detail for everyone. It was like a really, really bad incident. And basically I had to have emergency surgery. And through that emergency surgery, I was not able to go to school and then participate in my exams. And I remember sitting there in the hospital bed, looking up at the ceiling, thinking, I actually have no control over what happens in my life. And it's a profound thing now that I reflect on it, because before that I actually had believed that I could control my own destiny to some extent, and then I realized that my destiny is actually being pushed by something greater than me. Whatever it is, it's something beyond me, it's something beyond the fact that I control, whether you call it coincidence, whether you call it fate. It was something. Around the same time, I was really into hard atheism and new atheism, and I was watching the YouTube channel of a woman called Jacqueline Glenn, and I used to really love her videos. And I remember watching her video where she spoke about Islam, and there was a response to it by a gentleman in the Muslim community known as Kamal Saleh, Brother Kamal Saleh. And he made a video, and I remember being struck by the first thing he said. And he quoted Surah Al-Furqan, ayat 63, which I don't remember in Arabic, so I'll translate it. But basically said, when the ignorant address them harshly, the believers respond with words of peace. Now that was very different to the way that I'd seen interfaith, religious discussion and ideas of religion portrayed to me. I saw religion as something very backward. Yet in this ayat, I saw perhaps religion isn't so backward and morally backward as it's been portrayed to me, because basically it's saying, however people act to you, you have to act higher than that. And I later found out that there's an ayat in the Quran that basically says, be just, and do not let the injustice of others lead you into injustice, or the hatred of others lead you into injustice. And I remember seeing that, and then seeing all these things, I started to think, wow, this is a bit strange. But I was still very skeptical about religion and God. I thought this is just some coincidences. But I said, all right, if there's a real religion, show me there's a real religion. Show me the God, show me if there's a God, and give me an answer. And 3 days later, I was just walking in the street, and a da'i, so someone who gives dawah, you probably see them every now and again, calls to Islam. He just handed me a free Quran in the city one day, and I was just like, okay, that's a bit weird, straight after that. And from there, I'm like, okay, I started reading it, and I started connecting with the religion. Further on, I started to get more and more into my study of Islam again, which I had some knowledge left over from that period I explained when I was a kid. Sorry if I'm getting confusing. But yeah, so I was studying more and more and more and reading translations of the Quran, and I started to think, all right, why is alcohol prohibited? Like, why can't I drink alcohol? Like, all my friends drink alcohol, we go to parties, drink alcohol, we have a good time, but it doesn't really harm anyone. It doesn't really have any issues associated with it if it's done moderately. Anyway, that next party I went to, I took like a little bit of alcohol, and it was somehow, I don't know to this day, but I had a very small amount, and it made me immensely sick, and I had to go to hospital and get my stomach pumped. And I promise you, I'm not lying. Like, I didn't just get smashed and be like, yo, it's a sign from God. I promise that. It was genuinely, I had a very, very small amount, much smaller than I used to have, and I ended up getting really, really, really sick, and I was really worried. I'm like, okay, can't drink alcohol. There's my answer. And then I said, well, why can't I have a relationship? Like, why do I have to get married to have a relationship? So I thought, let's just, like, why can't I just have a girlfriend? Anyway, 3 days later, this girl just popped out. I had never spoken to a girl at this time, by the way. I was like a really awkward, pimple-faced, like 18-year-old guy. And I hadn't spoken to a girl before. And all of a sudden this girl, she was actually a Turkish Muslim, was introduced to me by a friend of mine. And we started like going out and hanging out together. And it was like the first girl I met who was cool. She liked football. And I liked football, so I'm like, yo, match instantly. But yeah, she started teaching me a bit about Islam. And then like 2 weeks, I was totally in love with her. Like, I'm gonna marry this girl, we're gonna spend the rest of eternity together. And then like 2 weeks later, inexplicably, she just broke up with me. She's like, I can't see you anymore. Bye. And it was really devastating. It took me quite a while to recover from that. Like quite a while in 18-year-old terms, like maybe 2 days, 3 days. It's hard. I'm like, okay, how many coincidences do I have to face where I ask a question and it's answered? How many times, like, is it empirical of me? Because I was a big believer in empiricism and questioning everything. Is it empirical of me to keep denying this? And then I remember reading the ayah of the Quran that's repeated a lot, Surah Al-Rahman, and which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, yo, maybe Islam is true. And all of my life flashed before my eyes, from the day I read that chapter over and over again, to the day this Turkish Muslim girl broke up with me. And I was like, yo, oh, is my thing broken?
No.
Okay, awesome. It just sounded weird. And then it flashed before my eyes, and I'm like, yo, it's real. It's all real. I was lied to all my life, and then I converted to Islam. So yeah.
Right, go over to Lisa. Did you guys want to ask any expounding questions?
So is it working? Yeah. So my experiences as an ex-Muslim is very different to most, where they're usually born and raised as a Muslim and then leave. I actually dated a Muslim and became a Muslim through that way, and then left. So I will have to explain the story, how I got in, as well as how I got out. So, to give you a bit of information about my background, I was born into a Christian family, and then at the age of 12, I started leaving because I got introduced to atheism, and I found the arguments for it quite convincing. And then throughout when I was 13, 14, I started becoming a bit more of an agnostic atheist. So I was searching for the truth. At the time of 16 years old, I started dating my high school sweetheart who was a Muslim. And throughout my time in high school, I learned quite a fair bit about Islam, so I thought I knew a bit about the religion, or quite a fair bit about the religion, and was taught very heavily by my teachers that it is a religion of peace, and Muslims in society are strongly victimized because they're targeted by the media and society in general. So I had a very strong connection to my partner in the sense that I wanted to strongly defend him and protect him and stand for Muslims within Western countries. So throughout my experience dating him, I I didn't learn that much about Islam until a year and a half later. So, because when you're dating a Muslim, there is a strong requirement that you have to get married very early on because the dating is quite taboo. I started really digging a lot more into the religion, and the family supported me a lot throughout it. And I fell in love with the community because they were all really wonderful people, and they talked about the Quran as a really beautiful scripture. They talked about it as if it was their most important things in their lives, and I was just like, wow, this religion is really beautiful. And I felt very connected to it because the people around me were so wonderful. And a lot of the people in the community were scientists as well. So I felt that the science in the Quran was quite accurate because the people aside me were highly regarded within the scientific in their courses as they were doing PhDs in science and so forth. So it eventually got to the point where I actually started to believe in it. There was a lot of fear involved as well after of being in the community, because whenever you're going to mosques and prayers, you're constantly reminded of the idea of hell, heaven, making sure that you have to do the right things, you have to do everything perfect in order to get into heaven. So the possibility that hell could exist was something that stuck inside, and it was ingrained in me, and that's one of the big reasons why I continued to stay into religion. It wasn't until a little bit longer, when I was quite heavily involved in it, I started learning a little bit more about Sharia law. I knew the basics of it, but not in detail. And they taught me, in order to be a proper Muslim, that I'd have to believe in ideas such as, if you left the faith, then you should be killed, or if you're a homosexual, you should be killed. And if you're a woman, then you should accept that there are certain things where you'll be treated half equal to a man. For example, women's testimony. And I was deeply confused and quite horrified that these views existed, because they were such great people, and these completely conflicted with human rights. But
you just have to point it at your mouth.
Is it? Okay. I continued to stay because I knew that these people, they weren't bad people. I could understand by then the way that Muslims think, and the way they think is that they can't actually come to conclusions on their own, because if they do, there's this fear that they could go to hell. The only way that they can come to conclusions is through the scholars telling them what they should do. And so I knew that they were trapped into this kind of thinking, a lot of them. I learned that throughout 13 Muslim countries around the world, the apostasy rule is applied. And looking at the statistics, there are quite a lot of Muslims around the world that hold these beliefs. And I want to make it very clear that I don't see Muslims as bad people for this reason. Most of them are very good people, and there should be a very strong distinction between that. So after learning a bit about Sharia law, I started vigorously learning as much as I possibly could about the religion. I learned that there were so many different interpretations, and people have no idea what they're thinking about when it comes to Islam, because there's so many things. It's such a complicated ideology that so many people need to learn a lot more about. And it got to the point where I started to really read the Quran. I know at that time I was told that I couldn't read the Quran because in order to read the Quran, you had to first learn Arabic, and that's when you can properly understand it. But that didn't make much sense to me, because if God was so powerful and wise, then why would He create the Quran in only one language that people can understand? That didn't make sense, so I decided to read it. And throughout my time reading it, that's when I started really distancing myself from the faith, because the things that I was encouraged to do in the Quran, and taking it from a literal perspective, was encouraging me to act violently against people that weren't Muslims, that were homosexuals, and there was constant fear of of hellfire, and making sure that I had to follow everything rigorously. After looking more into atheism and learning more about evolution and reading books from new atheists, that also helped me gain the courage to finally leave. So yeah, that's basically the story.
Where to begin? I was, of course, born into a Muslim home in Pakistan.
Just want to say, man, you just got to hold it fairly close to your mouth and point it right at it.
Okay. Better?
Yeah, better.
Yeah, so I was born into a Muslim home. My parents were never too strict in forcing me to practice the religion, though they themselves were conservative. I did begin reading the Quran and practicing it from an early age, so by personal choice, because there was always that desire in me to believe in a God, in a greater being. It's always there. Before I go on to that, I think it's best that I start with discussing one of among the three most common stereotypes I've seen ex-Muslim being subjected to by the Muslim community about why they leave Islam. Probably the first one is we wanted to go and sin without the fear of consequences and repercussions. Honestly, this was the most hilarious stereotype, in which I never thought I'd actually hear in a first world country. I mean, I have to ask, how many of you know people who identify as Muslims and do things like smoke weed, drink alcohol, have sex before marriage, not pray 5 times a day, but still identify as Muslim? Particularly when not only, because I know quite a lot. If liberal values were all that I favored over Islamic jurisprudence, I would probably still be a liberal, feminist, Muslim woman. Others claim that we blame our negative life experiences on Islam and God. I have yet to understand this over-reliance of people to believe that a person leaves a religion or becomes an atheist because of emotional reasons instead of rationale or logic, especially considering rationality and religious concepts don't always go hand in hand, in my opinion. It's also the over-reliance that believing external factors are always at fault, never religious concepts themselves, but the fact that people simply don't agree with the beliefs. I won't deny that I had lived difficult life experiences. I also won't deny that whilst I still identified as Muslim, I did rebel and do un-Islamic things. However, throughout all this time, I still had an immense desire to believe in God. Still prayed and never blamed my life circumstances on God, but more realistic factors. Even an atheist has to acknowledge that the concept of a God is very desirable. Someone who cares for you immensely, is always looking out for you, and is willing to forgive you, even for your harshest sins. But what I realized was this concept is flawed. The only real outcome of my negative experiences I had was that they made me question the logic of what I believed. Personally, I became an atheist after I was satisfied that the evidence garnered proved religious beliefs to be fiction, not fact, and that religious practices clearly lacked rationale, consistency, and were unjustifiable. I realized also that Muhammad was not, in fact, a saint or a messenger of God, nor as evil as many anti-Islamists would claim, but simply a product of this time. Last stereotype that I've commonly gotten, we confuse culture with religion. I mean, coming from Pakistan, this is probably the argument that I've most been exposed to. growing up in an upper middle class family, I was never exposed to the violent or cultural Islam that many assume I was. Hell, before Australia, I've lived in 4 other countries, 3 of which are first world. I'd say I've had a rather luxurious life, and it's not that hard to see where your culture ends and your religion begins. And the interesting thing that these stereotypes have made me realize is that they've been uttered by people who are extremely unlikely to have even met ex-Muslims or anyone who's left Islam. It's not as if you have that much visibility to begin with. I have to say, for the people who've thrown out generalized statements, from imams to Muslims that I've come across, throw out such statements towards a group of people they know little to nothing about seems rather hypocritical. I mean, no different than when right-wing illiterates shout out something like all Muslims are terrorists, despite never even meeting a Muslim and having little to no knowledge about the Quran or Hadith. If it was such an easy thing to leave faith for these kinds of reasons, I'm pretty certain we wouldn't have so many gay Muslims or liberals or progressives who don't agree with the original Islamic beliefs or practice and want to reform instead of giving up the identity they hold utmost importance to. As I mentioned, I did have difficult life experiences, and they did make me much skeptical. I did have tons of health issues growing up, and often the response that I was told is by my family and by the community also is just pray to Allah and He will take it away, the evil eye that's come upon me. And this honestly made me skeptical from the rational thought behind it, because if God is the one to take it away, is He also not the one to give it to me? And that's the thing that I have to admit to. That initially science did not play a major role in making me question Islam. Instead, I'd say that rational thought and logic played the key roles in the beginning, making me realize the contradictions in basic religious beliefs, inherently making me more skeptical of religion itself and motivated to do further research. Like, for example, the initial image of God being a loving and merciful being, always looking out for you. It is the same God who makes it obligatory for you to pray to Him 5 times a day, continuously worshipping Him, not because it is necessary for His own survival, but simply because He desires the praise and glory. For me, the concept of this God has now changed from a loving and merciful being into a narcissist. He threatens you with severe punishment if you deviate from what he constitutes the correct way of life, and offers a reward after death if you continue to follow. Yeah. This is emotional manipulation. And what I've grown to accept over time is that the creation of God is the perfect way to control people. You can't deny people have been willing to give up so much for their God and do so much to honor Him. Another example is a continuous argument that this world is a test. How many times have you heard it? The hardships you're experiencing is all part of God's plan. He's testing your loyalty to Him. However, if everything is part of God's plan, then you're implying everything is inevitable, so there's no point of a test as God has already determined your outcome. Aware of what you're going to do before you even do it, again, no real point for Him to test you in the first place. The belief that, another common one, the belief that everything is part of God's plan also makes the concept of praying kind of useless, as everything has been predetermined, and the concept of free will is null and void. Going further, praying for a certain outcome can even be seen as contradictory because it's an implication that you don't trust God's plan for you and are pleading Him for change. All these kinds of thoughts processes, I actually came up with by myself before I even had proper access to the internet, I'd say. It was always, I guess I was naturally born with a questioning mind, wondering what right and wrong constitutes. It was never an easy journey for me to accept that I'm no longer Muslim or no longer identify with Islam. I tried my hardest to still believe in the religion. I went to imams, went to society meetings. I was part of the MSA in 2015 still, because I desperately wanted to find a belief in God. That's why I'd say that it was a very gradual process for me to leave Islam. I would say I became, from an atheist I turned into a deist. From a deist I turned into an agnostic, and then from an agnostic I turned into an atheist. I used critical thinking to rationalize every religious belief I doubted, and justifications for it as well. It was what made me realize my staunch disagreement with many beliefs and practices in the Quran, Hadith, and Muhammad's actions, and how none of them could be rationally defended or justified, as hard as scholars tried.
Alright, we might wrap it up there, Sabeena. Seems like some divine forces are trying to silence us out. Let's go on to the next question. Alright guys, so for this one, I'm going to prompt you guys all to try to keep it a bit shorter than before. Try to keep it to around 3 minutes. I won't interrupt you if you're going for a long time, but just try to watch out. I'll put the mic on the table if you're going over 3 minutes and try to wrap it up around there. Alright guys, so the next question is there any sort of evidence or life experience that you think would make you revert to the other side? Now, I might start this in reverse order. So the USA can have the first word and MSA can have the last word. So if you want to go on that one, Sabeena. Once again, just mic fairly close to the mouth.
Don't think this will be a long answer. Yeah, belief in God.
Mic nice close to the mouth. That's it.
Yes. Belief in God. I would still want to believe in God if the evidence proves that He exists. As simple as that, like all atheists say. Most atheists don't believe in a God because it hasn't been proven to them. Substantial evidence hasn't been brought to them. Rather, the evidence often presented in books has been debunked and considered faulty by many. So, if that evidence comes in, would I revert back to Islam? I wouldn't. I must say from an early age I never agreed with a lot of the ideologies and belief systems. And it's a concept that it's always another person's fault and their own emotions. They, instead of blaming the concepts or religious concepts itself as to the reasons or why you believe it. So.
Awesome, right, we'll go on to Lisa.
So my answer on this will be quite short as well. So this is something that a lot of religious people ask me, and they often say that there is evidence that could possibly make me revert back to the other side. And a lot of these arguments are the idea that there are a lot of people believing in it. There are a lot of eyewitness testimonies for miracles, and that there are a lot of beauty in the scriptures that they believe in. So these were things that I actually thought were convincing arguments in the beginning when I didn't know much or question religion very much. But the issue with this argument is that almost everybody that has a religion uses these arguments to justify their beliefs. The thing is, why is it acceptable to have these arguments when it's your own religion? That's never made sense to me. Actual evidence that would make me revert to the other side would be solid facts. So this would mean that the science is high regarded within the scientific community. It's backed up by mountains of evidence as well as peer-reviewed scientific articles.
Alright, cool. We might give this mic a whirl instead of this one, so we'll see how we go. I'll pass it on to Rafael.
Thank you. The short answer for that is I should hope not. I've been in a place where I was on the other side, and if I went back to the other side, I remember the experience of life that I had, and it was very sad, it was very lonely, and I didn't feel like I had any purpose, any discipline, any meaning to any action that I did. I thought I was just a random fragment. There's no greater goal when you don't believe in an objective morality and you subscribe to something absolutist. It's kind of like your action. You can try to work for justice on earth, and you can say that that's my goal, to find happiness and to seek and create a better world. But whose definition of a better world am I trying to create? if the consensus of society decides that something's a good word in 100 years, it's a good word in 100 years, and it may not agree today. So what am I actually working towards? And it wasn't like I was not seeking, like I was seeking purpose. Like I was sitting there like, oh, I need something to do, you know, FIFA's getting boring. I would have been so much happier. I was not so much happier, obviously. Ultimately, I would be very unhappy. But I was fine, like, with no purpose. It wasn't like I was looking for something, demanding that. And that was the reason, if you want to apply that being the reason I converted to Islam, because I sought purpose. That's really not the case. I became Muslim because I believe Islam was true. And I just want to say that there's nothing like being close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for those, there's nothing like being in a state of closeness to the divine being. And I think of a poem, it's a Turkish poem by a man named UNSW, and he said, "Oymul kemelim salmışam ben bu cihanın eylerim," which means, take me back to that kingdom, for I don't want to return to that kingdom that is called the earth. And when you feel closeness to Allah and when you feel closeness to the divine being, you don't want to be back down when you were distant again. So my short answer is I should hope not.
Alright, awesome. We'll move it on.
So, just a couple of things to point out. Definitely, I think it's a natural human thing that we're always questioning ourselves and asking ourselves if we're being fair, if we're being biased. Always, not always second guessing, but I guess never being 100% certain that what your thought process is, that it's completely, fault free. So I think it's a normal thing, and myself as well. I'm always, every time I'm confronted with a different type of argument or different type of evidence, it's always, it's not, okay, that's it, I'm blocking everything, I think I've got everything figured out. That being said, though, I think, a lot of these claims that Lisa and Sabeena made, upon hearing them, I think anyone would have, big alarm bells raising, thinking, okay, if this is what Islam really is about, then I don't know, I think I'm going to stay away. And I think it's very important, and this is why I think this panel is a good idea, is because we can actually engage with them. Because a lot of times what happens is that these arguments are presented, and due to, I guess, the ignorance of the audience or lack of engagement, we don't really get to, see, okay, is that what Islam really has? Is faith driven by, a fear of hellfire? What is, apostasy laws? What is this, like, unequal representation between, men and women? These things that are taken for granted, it's very easy to, upon hearing them, easily dismiss it. But it's just a matter of being intellectually sincere and honest. Like, okay, just with anything else, you would, approach the qualified, you would approach people who are well-versed in their fields to see, okay, is there more depth involved? Is there more nuance involved, right? So upon, when I came across these sort of objections as well, it definitely caused me to, think. But it wasn't sort of like, oh, that's it, Islam doesn't make any sense. But it's a matter of, okay, let me dig deeper and let me actually see if there's, anything more about this than what I've heard. So I think that's a very important thing. Other than that, this concept of, and I think everyone's quite familiar of, like, oh, there's no scientific proof. Until I find scientific proof for the existence of God, I can't believe it, because, that's what my standard of proof is. But you have to realize that this, phenomenon of, basing your reality on science is a very recent one, right? And it has context to it as well. So it's not something that is very objective, as much as it seems to be. So, living in our materialist world, in our empirical-driven world, where we want to base everything on what we can see, okay, fine. Perhaps there's not scientific evidence for the existence of God, but that doesn't mean there is no evidence for the existence of God. That's the limitation of science as a field, right? That method of inquiry is limited to what you can see. There's other ways of determining truths, right? So there's other logical. So scientific method is a form of a logical method, but it's not the only way. So whether that's logical analysis, conceptual analysis, rational proofs, reports as well. There's many different ways, and you do this in your life all the time. Like, you have different ways of ascertaining the truth of certain things. Why limit something to one form of evidence, right? So I think when if I was to go to the other side, I think it's not as simple as, okay, these arguments they seem like they're legit, that's I'm gonna convert. It's a matter of being sincere and actually going and digging them further, and hopefully in my experience of doing that, I didn't find them to be as foolproof as it seems to be, so I don't think I would convert to the other side.
Right, awesome. We might move it up to the third question again, if we want to put it up. Alright, so the third question is how do you feel context influences one's beliefs? And to expand on that, is one's faith dependent on their surroundings? Or is it a moral or more direct decision? How has context impacted your own faith? So we'll start with you again, Zoe, and we'll go from there.
Sorry, my name's not Zarwa. Okay, everyone
What is it
has
again?
their own takes on it. It's Zarwa.
Zarwa.
Yeah.
That's close, come on.
Okay. Okay. Context. A lot of people have this objection or this point that they raise that, okay, you're only Muslim or you're only following a specific religion because that's what you're exposed to. And just recently I had a conversation with someone as well, and that's what their main thing was. They were saying that religious people are very inwards. They have their own ways of belief, and that's what they want to stick to. And to a level, I think that is true. That there are many people in Muslim majority countries that are Muslim by identity, but for example, they don't do many things that Muslims should be doing, right? But I don't think that's limited to religion. I think that's a natural human thing. Everyone is in a specific context, and that context has an influence over their beliefs, right? So it's not. I wouldn't say that just religious people are indoctrinated. Everyone has some sort of indoctrination, but it's just a different type of indoctrination. We're living in a system, like a specific system, right? We're living in a materialist system, one that heavily relies on the scientific method, right? That's our standard of proof. So, one can argue that that's, your education system, your social system, your legal system is all based on that philosophical worldview. So a lot of people have their, points of views because of that system. So, and like we've seen this all the time. Anyone who's been part of, like for instance, the MSA's weekly or whatever stalls that they have, and they speak to people, they come and say that, yeah, we're atheists or agnostic because of science. Like we believe in science. But if you push out a bit further, like they don't know the basics of science, right? It's not that they're ignorant of science, but it's because they put their trust in a method, right? And they believe what comes through that, which I don't think is different to people who adhere to religious principles as well. I think the difference is that while context does have an influence, right? I don't think it dictates exactly for everyone. So it's not that you're only driven by your context. That's the only influence that's that's upon you. Rather, I think everyone has that ability to reason. It's just are you going to actually listen to yourself or engage with those questions you have, or are you just going to push it away? And I think our society makes it very comfortable to push these questions away. We don't really need to ask ourselves or dig deeper into them because, quite frankly, a lot of us, especially in our context, don't feel the need to, okay, maybe I don't need to see if there's a God because it's not really relevant to my life. But I think if we dig these questions a bit deeper, we can all see that we all have the ability to reason, right? And we can always assess, trying to be assessing as objectively as possible, what influences are at play and how am I making my decisions and what influence do these have on my decisions.
I guess just continuing on that, thinking about, I think a lot of people do have problems with religion nowadays, so referring to that, addressing that side of the question of do people believe because of their context, do people not believe in a God because of their context too? And I'd say yes, and I think studying history and studying the history of philosophy, dating back to Montaigne, the early Enlightenment philosophers who started to move away from religion and towards like a more naturalist, like based empiricism and the growth of the scientific method as a means for ascertaining reality. But for me, in my own experience, at what point did it become irrational for me to deny what was clearly in my belief before me? And I was born into that postmodernist Enlightenment secular society, which is what I've probably said like 1,000 times now, postmodernist Enlightenment. I'm trying to find synonyms, guys. So I certainly subscribe to that. And the reason I subscribe to that was because of the context I was born in. But what happens is the most powerful people in the world subscribe to that ideology. So in places of power, there is the possibility that the idea of the hegemonic ideology. So the ideology that is held by the most powerful people at the time will have an influence on the people who are living in that society, and that happens a lot today with I believe, secularism, atheism, and this idea of human rights. Western ideas of human rights are literally being forced onto the rest of the world. But who decided they were human rights? Other human beings. And what if they decide that human rights are different in 100 years? You can't actually answer that. So I'm just going to conclude with a story about responding to that from like a Muslim perspective. I was listening to a man the other day from Uruguay in 1982, and he was at a barbecue. He was just like frying his pork and doing all that stuff that Uruguayans do, and talking about football, and then they started talking about politics, and then they started talking about Christianity, then Judaism, then someone mentioned Islam, and they were all talking about Islam. And he was just standing there, and he was like, wait a minute, these guys don't actually know what they're talking about when it comes to Islam. Like, these people are just saying random things, and they haven't actually looked into it. I'm going to go find out what Islam is. And he started to get really irritated, and he just stormed off and said, you know what you're talking about, stormed off, and he started looking at 2 o'clock in the morning in bookstores in Uruguay for a Quran. And no one had a Quran, and finally he found one, and it cost him basically his whole salary, and he was like, nah, I'm not going to buy it. And he walked 20 meters, and then he said, to this day I don't know why, but I just turned around without thinking, bought it. And he said, I can't explain to you what turned me to move around. And then he discovered Islam through that. And you know, there are stories of people just randomly discovering Islam, like they have a dream and they wake up and they want to discover, like they want to learn about Islam, so they get onto the computer and they start researching Islam. In places like Brazil, and there's a really famous YouTube video by Islamic Education and Research Organization or something, IERA in England, about a Brazilian convert, and they met him in Brazil when he came, and he cried and cried and cried. So in that sense, context does not necessarily influence your faith and your religion, and I do believe that there is divine will, and in that same regard, I do believe that sincerity has a large role to play in finding truth and being guided towards our idea of truth, and through that, yes, the ultimate truth.
Awesome. Alright, I'll pass it over to you guys for now. Once again, just keep the mic nice and close to the mouth. You don't have to make out with it, but just keep it pretty close.
So this is a question that I've thought of a lot, and I came to the conclusion after a while thinking about it that yes, it does make a very big impact, because if you think about it, if I was born in Saudi Arabia, where a majority of people are Muslim, then it would make so much sense that I'd be born and raised as a Muslim as well. I'd probably come to that conclusion. If a couple hundred years ago, where a lot of people actually believed in Zeus, if I was born during that time, and considering majority of people believe in it, then I'd very well be likely to believe in that too. If I was born into a Christian family, it's very likely for me to be Christian as well. And the reasons for that is because there's a human reason for that, in the sense that we all want to belong. We want to be able to please our family, our friends, our loved ones, and make sure that we are cohesive in the beliefs that we all have. And it also made me realize that this point is very interesting, because my experiences going into religion, I didn't have much of another choice, because I really wanted to be with the person that I was with, and the emotions surrounding that urgency of trying to figure out what else I could do besides follow the religion, there wasn't much for me. And being around people that believed in it so much, and being around people that were so wonderful, made me want to belong and want to be a part of it. I can't imagine how much impact this faith would have on me if I was brought up into it, because I know when you're born into it, there is a lot more fear and less choice involved as you grow up.
Alright, cool. Pass on to Sabeena.
Simply to add on, context influencing one's beliefs, it most definitely does. I'd say, obviously I can't speak for all people, but looking at current trends in modern day, I'd say for the majority of people, it is the surroundings that more impact them rather than just a simple direct decision. It's because if you're already in an environment in which you're questioning your faith, and particularly which faith you're going to leave it for, whether questioning your faith is accepted in that society or not, whether the faith you're leaving it for has a community of its own, which often, if you're leaving Islam or Christianity for atheism, it's only been recent that atheists have developed a community of their own. Before it was rather isolating. And like the risks that you will endure, obviously the real life consequences of all of your actions. So these are all things that you need to take into consideration. And obviously being indoctrinated into a religion that doesn't leave much room for choice, unless you are even exposed to those ideologies and concepts, which in the modern day we're trying to gain more and more access. The internet has provided, you can gain access to religious sources, non-religious sources, so you have more of a personal choice instead of being forced into practicing or believing in a particular concept.
Great, awesome. We might move on to the fourth question then. Alright, so the fourth question is, what are the boundaries you believe on critiquing and criticizing religion? Expounding on that, why do you believe such boundaries exist? So we'll start with you again, Sabeena. Okay.
So, I actually think that there should be absolutely no boundaries of critiquing religion. The reason, a very strong reason for that is, if you think about it, 500 years ago, Christianity was a very bloody and torturous and vile religion where they kill people for leaving the faith, they burn people if they were seen as witches, and so these are things that we look back on in horror. The only reason why Christianity has reformed today is because we've been able to criticize it. We criticize it. We were able to offend those who had those crazy beliefs at the time, and because of that, it eventually reformed. The problem with Islam at the moment is, and the reason why they still have these beliefs that conflict with human rights and are very similar to the beliefs that Christianity had 500 years ago, is because it has not reformed yet. And any attempts to reform the faith have been shut down, or the people who tried have been killed, unfortunately. So, yeah, I really think that's very important. And another important point that I'd like to make is that being within the Muslim community, I noticed that a lot of the mainstream Muslims were strongly against the fundamentalists, the extremists, and they were actually very afraid to offend those people, because within those communities they know that they strongly found offense as a really bad thing, so they feared criticizing them. So if you're somebody who's strongly against fundamentalism, I think that you too would agree that there shouldn't be no boundaries in order for criticism to take place against extremists, so they don't grow.
Okay, Sabeena, did you want to add something?
Just to add on to Lisa's argument.
Likewise, nice and close enough.
Keep forgetting, bad memory. It's, again, I completely agree with Lisa's argument that there shouldn't be any boundaries to critiquing religious ideology. Like, first of all, Islam is a set of ideas. It's like, moreover, it's all quite commonly considered to be part belief system and part political. When you're viewing certain ideas from criticism and putting them on a pedestal, just for the sake of protecting people's feelings, it is actually causing more harm than good. Whether a person is living under Islamic law or under Christian law, it's like there are tons who suffer and are oppressed because of those laws, and you're not hearing those voices out. In fact, you're silencing victims who are suffering. A prominent example would be the Draw Muhammad. When it comes to criticism, prominent example would be Draw Muhammad Day, though not widely practiced, was created to prove a point after Charlie Hebdo the Charlie Hebdo incident, that no one deserved to die for mocking or critiquing a religious figure or concept. And the fact is that with Islam in particular nowadays, it's just reached a point where the term Islamophobia is unable to differentiate between genuine criticism of the religion and what is actual anti-Muslim bigotry. Because it's often now just used as an escape mechanism by many to avoid any actual criticism or discussion on Islam, which is why I completely agree with Zarwa when she said that it was a good idea to have these panels and have everybody's voices be heard. Yes.
Awesome. Good, Rafael.
So, okay, there's a few things I really have to unpack, so I'll try and be as quick as possible. The first thing I'd say is that as a fundamentalist, someone who believes in the fundamentals of Islam, a lot of other fundamentalists here today who also believe in the fundamentals of Islam. We don't actually like the term Islamophobia that much. We have some problems with it, and we don't ever use the term to defend criticism of religion. I'm sure perhaps in your experience of discussing and other people's experience with Muslims, they would hold that term, but there are many people within the religion, many practicing Muslims who don't like that term because of the origins of that term not being an Islamic, sort of term itself, and being where it comes out of being the secular modern discourse. So the criticism may encompass a number of things. So for example, if I saw a Jewish man wearing a kippah, I might say, he's wearing a hat. Jewish people are silly. And that's a criticism, is it not? And it's a very basic, but it's a mockery. And so there's a distinguishing between that and being grounded in the literature of something and having an intellectual difference. Now, that idea, because someone mentioned, I don't remember if it was yourself or Sabeena, that most people who criticize Islam have been threatened with, or most of them are dead, I think you said was the term. But I would put it to you that there are many reformers of Islam, like Muhammad Abduh. I don't know if you're aware of him, he's an Egyptian scholar. And the various modernist movement that came out amongst Islam and the scholars, unfortunately the very infamous now Tariq Ramadan was a prominent modernist and reformer of Islam, and he basically said something that a lot of us would find problematic in the Muslim community, which is your entire scholarly tradition for the last 1400 years has to be thrown out, and we have to revisit this. And he's not known for he received more death threats from right-wing people in France than he did from the practice Muslim traditional or conservative fundamentalist community rather. But a lot of people respected him for his criticisms, and a lot of people respected Muhammad Abduh despite these differences because he was very well grounded in Islam and the literature of Islam, and he understood Islam, and it wasn't a mockery, and it wasn't based on a superficial understanding of what Islam was and what the Islamic tradition encompasses. So people had a lot of respect for him. Someone mentioned Christianity, moving away from Christianity because of the criticisms, and Islam needs to have the same thing. So I would contest the idea that we live in a society today because people criticize Christianity. I think that a lot of it had to do with the Civil War. It wasn't like a doctrinal pull-out of Christianity. It was like people are killing each other. We've had enough of religion. It's not so much a criticism. It was more like just a tiredness and a sickness of the 40% of the German population was wiped out. And I remember reading Montaigne the other day, and he was saying that people are doing this in the name of piety. He didn't actually attack Christian doctrine and criticize Christian doctrine. He just said we need to move away from this now. And he's alive. And there are plenty of people in the world who are doing that today and saying we need to move away from these religious beliefs within the Muslim community as well. Sam Harris, when he talks about empowering democratic Muslims and people who view this way, I see that as a form of colonization. But it is exactly what happened in the Christian tradition, that people are dying in the name of religion, henceforth we need to move away from religion. Is that really a criticism of religion? I wonder. So when it comes to what are the boundaries of critiquing religion, I guess to answer that direct question as it literally means, I really think that you can criticize anything about Islam. If anyone came up to me and said anything to me about Islam, I wouldn't say you're being Islamophobic and in a public discourse. But there are ideas that are being propagated about our religion that are lies and that are false. And there are a lot of people who have criticized our religion and our tradition who we've respected greatly, and they're still alive to this day amongst Muslims. So.
Just to add on to what Rafael just said. I think we need to make a distinction between what is critiquing and what is, offensive or bigotry. So when we say that we want there to be no restrictions on critiquing religion, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that, we're okay to offend, we're okay to mock, right, which has no effective purpose? So the whole point, or free speech is a value. It's a means to an end, right? But when it becomes the end itself, then it becomes problematic. So if you are critiquing, or if you want free speech in order to put checks and balances on power, if you want to intellectually engage with certain things, certain ideas, criticism is valid. Like, it's encouraged, right? Come intellectually and sincerely engage. But when it comes to mockery and bigotry, then that's a big issue, right? Because now you're not just, it's not a matter of picking out faults, which you could do in intellectual ways. If you had certain objections with the character of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you could definitely come forth with, maybe write an article, write a, respectable paper. No one's gonna, get really upset or get really angry, right? But when you come and, do with the intention of, cartoons, like, what's the whole purpose of that? Like, are you doing it to, critique that, or are you doing it to offend people, right? And it kind of fits in with the bigger image of dehumanizing. So any sort of, if you look at the pyramid of hate, right, at the bottom is bias, which everyone has. Right, as you move up, right, you have individual acts of prejudice, and these are like small things, like comments, as Rafael said about the Jewish man, like small indicators about differences, right, kind of in a mocking way. And as you move up, you get to discrimination, you get to, that's how hate. And that's how violence has been conducted. Because it doesn't happen overnight, right? It happens as a slow process. It happens by dehumanizing, right, and mocking and making fun of a certain group of people and then justifying it, right? So the Holocaust didn't happen overnight. It became with blaming the Jews and accusing the Jews, and then that's how a whole society was able to do that. So when it comes to critiquing and bigotry, we definitely need to be able to distinguish between the two. Are we using the principle of free speech to justify our prejudices, or are we doing it as a sincere human right we want to have? I think that's a very important conversation. Even though most of us over here might have that sincere intention that we just want to engage in valid criticisms, we have to realize this broader picture of the same people that are pushing for freedom of speech, right, is happening within a secular framework where we want these values to go through. We want to be able to say anything about religion, right? But then we're the same people that want to put restrictions on what can be and what cannot be expressed in religion, and we see that all the time. So you want to have the green light to mock a whole society, but then you also want to limit what they can and what they cannot do. You want to, just a few weeks ago in Austria, people are being, you can't wear the headscarf in public schools anymore, or you can't, a woman was denied French citizenship because she refused to shake the hand of the official, right? These sort of things, that's when we want to put restrictions on religion, but then when we want to have restrictions on other aspects of society, when we use these principles of free speech. But I think we should really be critical of where these things are coming from, what they're being used to justify.
Alright, awesome. Some really interesting answers there. Do you want to move on to the last question? I will ask you guys, we'll try to keep this one fairly brief so we can probably have a solid 20 minutes for over question time for everyone. So I'll start with you, Zarwa. We'll go from there. Oh, sorry, yeah, and the question is, in your imagining of an ideal world, would you want everyone to adopt your beliefs, and why or why not?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty straightforward sort of question. So obviously, if you believe in something to be, the truth or the way forward for humanity, then naturally you want everyone to, be on the same page as you. But at the same time, it's not that now I'm going to force everyone in this room to become Muslim because this is what I really believe in. It's the natural, natural consequence that if you want something and you believe something is the truth, and you want that. For everyone, you want everyone to recognize that, appreciate that in a sense.
Yeah, I think we have the same answer to that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, like there's no compulsion in religion. That being said, I think that accepting Islam would help the world and be better for the world, and certainly better for them ultimately in terms of their entire existence too. So I would like to see that in my ideal world, yes.
So in my ideal world, I would like to see a world where we are prioritizing people's basic fundamental human rights. In today's society, what we see is people caring so much about people's feelings and putting that above absolutely everything, which is why the ex-Muslim movement, or people who have been ostracized, who are fighting for their lives, go unheard. And this is because just even the idea of being an ex-Muslim is seen as offensive. It's going to hurt people's feelings. They're known to critique religion, so people constantly shrug them under the rug. And these people are going through the most horrific circumstances where they have to leave their families, they live their lives in fear, and they have very little support. So I hope in 100 years' time we are prioritizing rights across all religions. That's when I think that we will see so much inclusivity across all religions, and I hope one day we don't have to worry about all this division and the discrimination between ideas. And I think we can all agree that there are many ideologies today that still are discriminatory. Their religions are still not perfect. There is still a long way for a lot of religions in order to reform. So we have to get rid of this idea that all religions are equal, that we have to respect religion, because that means respecting ideas that need to be reformed. And if you agree with that, then you are degressing. You don't want society to continue progressing. And I think that's a very important point to make.
So we'll finish up with Sabeena, if you want to add anything else.
I guess my ideal world could be a more unexpected answer over here, but it's the fact that though I am an atheist and I'm more completely comfortable, my ideal world would be one in which we live and let live. Because it's not to say that everybody who's just automatically adopts the belief of an atheist is a good person. Neither is it saying that anybody who becomes a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew is a bad person. Many people have gone to religion and it's made them much better people. Same way for those who have left religion as well. But the world, my ideal world, would be one in which you don't put any ideology on a pedestal and protect it, immune it from criticism, or simply to protect people's feelings, or the concept that we are being forced to respect another person's viewpoint or being forced to respect another person's belief system. Because I can just ask in this room right now who respects Nazism, which is also an ideology, but nobody will raise their hand to it. So we are not to make any special circumstances for that.
Alright, fantastic. What we might do now is we might open up the floor to questions from the audience. So I shall have this floating around. Can I have your hands up for anyone who wants to ask a question? Alright, cool. I think it's fine without the mic, it'll take too much time passing it. Can I get Edward? Alright guys, everyone listening up because we're not using microphones to the audience.
So I got like two questions, if that's okay. I'm not
Sure.
too greedy. But they're probably directed more towards people that are practicing the Muslim faith that's current. So I asked myself, I grew up in a background of Christianity, so all my life I basically got pushed into believing in God, going to church, all these kind of things through schooling. And then later on at the stage, I kind of questioned myself, I didn't take anyone else's words, no one influenced me, it was just basically me questioning, do I really need to be going to church? Is this fun? Is this doing any good? Basically my question is, why do we have to worry in our current life if there is a God or not? Why can't we simply live our life being the best person we can be based on the positive effects we have on our environment and others? And if there is a God, and if there is or isn't a God, when that time comes, that God will base his decision, if he or she or them, will base their decision if I can stay with them for an eternity or not. It will be based on the decision whether I was a respectful person to others based on my own goodwill and not the force of his fatherhood or her motherhood. Basically, why I think I have a common problem with any religion, whether it's Buddhism, reincarnation, always having this kind of will to do something just because I'm going to get something in return. And not instead, I do something because I want to do something for someone out of my own good heart. I think that's kind of so basically to wrap up, why do we care if there's a God or not? Why can't we just be the best person to our ability and leave religion behind for now? Like, what's the problem? Like, a God would never turn me down. Like, if I'm doing all that is good, why would he say, oh, you go to hell because you never believed in me?
Alright, we might distill that one there. Essentially, the question was basically why worry about God when we can try to be the best we can be.
Okay, so there's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, so basically the saying of our Prophet ﷺ, and he said, translated to English, and this is a hadith that's recorded as being genuine, something that he actually said. What actions are most excellent? To gladden the heart of human beings, to feed the hungry, to help the afflicted, to lighten the sorrow of the sorrowful, and to remove the sufferings of the injured. So that sounds pretty good, I'm sure, in terms of what it means to be a good person. But we would answer your question in a number of ways. And the first thing I'd like to say again is that, and it's something that I see occurring a lot, is we believe in Islam because we have this concept like the hierarchy of faith. So someone who fears God and does good out of fearing God, he has like the lowest level of belief, and he has the least amount of reward with God, supposedly. Someone who does good and avoids evil because they're scared of, they want a reward for it, they have like the second level. So they're not afraid of punishment and they're not wanting good. But the highest level is to do it out of love for God himself.
But why not for the good of someone else? So
we believe that the good of humanity and the good of human beings is fundamental to our religion and the flourishing of human culture. However, we don't believe that good can be arbitrarily determined by a human being. So what is positive, we don't know. We defer the wisdom of what is ultimately good and evil to a higher source. And we believe we have access to that higher source through revelation. So you can say, why can't I just be a good person? We'd say, what is a good person? Why can't I just be positive for other people? How do you know you're being positive for other people?
But if I'm attacking somebody, sorry, I just really want to...
Yeah, it's fine.
I need to find out.
No, it's fine.
So like, if I'm attacking somebody and they're telling me they're crying and screaming out in pain to stop from harming them, that's ideally they're telling me that they don't want that to happen to them, right? And if God is telling me to do that, for example, animals, right? Yes. If I go out and I slaughter a cow, or slaughter a pig, or slaughter whatever, like maybe in Muslim you don't slaughter pig, but you slaughter maybe, say chicken. If that chicken is screaming and asking for it not to be killed, like, who's the judge then? God is the judge? No. I think the chicken is asking for us not to kill them. So, what's your answer to that?
Well, firstly, I think it was Ibn Taymiyyah, he said that the believers in God are the most merciful to the creation. And that includes, like the Prophet said, if you are going to eat meat and if you are going to slaughter things, why would you kill the animal twice? Don't strike with the knife. So don't be cruel to animals. And we have many, many sayings within our tradition and many, many points within our tradition that condemn people who are unnecessarily cruel to animals. People who are hunted for burning an ant, were reprimanded for burning an ant, sorry. And so that these ideas definitely do exist within our tradition, but even
halal, like if you slaughter a cow halal, they're still screaming. They're still screaming in pain, and they're still bleeding. And you can use science to see that they use pain receptors and they're being harmed. So if someone is telling you that they're being harmed, right? But I think it's very ignorant to say, oh no, my God allows this. Like that. I think it's better to use science in this case, or.
So you believe that science is the best way of telling people?
No, because that animal is telling me.
Yeah.
That animal is telling me, like, purely my gut instinct. I've seen many videos of like, say, Muslim children crying their eyes out as their father cuts a chicken's head open like halal, or a cow. And
I think what Ed is trying to say is, why not use empathy as a basis for moral decisions instead of a divine law?
Just to go a bit back, I think just what I had in mind when you were asking the question, I think the Islamic concept of the relationship between us and God, I think differs from the Christian concept. So we don't see God as an absolute figure who just created us and now, like, there's not much of a connection. So for Muslims, God is, like, he's the authority, right? So he tells us what is the ideal way of living, and there's this whole worldview that comes with that submission to God. It's kind of like, for example, you're doing a course at university and you're saying that to your, lecture professor that, okay, I want to study this how I want to study it. I think this is the right way to do it, and I think I've got it figured out. But that authority knows more than you. They know what you don't know. They know like what trajectory you're going on. When it comes to empathy, that's again assuming that pain is necessarily a bad thing when it comes to animals, right? So just because an animal is, crying or it's going to endure pain, that doesn't mean that this is an act of evil, right? If God created animals, it again comes back
but
to
then I could inflict pain on you.
Alright, well, we might throw it up to another question. We'll have a big, probably open discussion elsewhere about various ideas like this. Can I get a hand up for a second question? I'm gonna have to cut you off there. And, for me to cut you off, this is I'll call it that. Alright. Can I get the gentleman in the centre of me?
Yeah. Just kind of following up off of that, we spoke about empathy as a source of morality, right? And you guys kind of alluded to that as well in some of your responses, where you just, for example, about valuing the emotions of humans rather than just whether something is true or not, and therefore like hating them or punishing them for it. But just kind of going off that, when you speak about empathy as a basis for morality, how do we be consistent with that? So, for example, as part of your response, Sabeena, to the fourth question about critiquing religion, you actually actively use the word mockery alongside critique, and the basis of mockery is obviously that you're hurting someone's emotions. So if we're using empathy as the basis of our morality, then on what basis, for example, can we then say, okay, mocking religion and therefore hurting people's emotion is good because we're going to then guide them towards the greater good, which is kind of making religion more moderate. We've then kind of got being hypocritical because you're no longer using empathy as your basis, you're now using your basis as what is the greater good for people. So I guess my question is, first of all, do you have an objective source of morality? Is it empathy or is it something else? And then if that is the case, is it not hypocritical to say my basis for empathy is my basis for morality is empathy, however I believe that we should then mock religion even if it hurts people's feelings?
Awesome, really interesting question there. I'll pass this on to you guys. Would either of you want to open up on that? Would you like to start, Lisa?
Sorry, just to clarify, you're asking if the basis of empathy for morals, however, when human rights gets founded, it's not always based on people's emotions, it's based on more fundamental values as field. And what I've realized in religious concepts is just it's always what you're being told by a third party. How you decide to live your life and what morals you choose to have, as if you're claiming that without that third party you wouldn't have morals. Like a common argument always given to atheists is that the only thing stopping you, why aren't you committing incest right now? Only because your religion tells you not to. That's completely flawed. It becomes too much bigger concepts over here. When I said I'm not condoning mockery towards religions as I want to get them to change their belief systems for me, but it is actually proving a point. Like I said, Draw Muhammad Day was created because of the Charlie Hebdo incidents, in which case they created cartoons and ultimately were killed. And that's proving the point that it is not proportional punishment to be simply hurting someone's feelings and then actually being slaughtered for it. So that was actually the point that I was trying to emphasize over there, that there is no proportion. There are arguments with hate speech and how that impacts the wider community, which is initially based off of feelings of emotion as well.
Alright, awesome. Can I have another question there? I'll get the gentleman in brown in the back there.
Yep. Hi. So you guys, this is to the UAH. You guys both talked about your experiences with Islam and like Sharia law and this, that, the punishment. Like, what exactly about the sort of, so as in every like 14-year-old has these exact same questions, and they go online and they research this and they're like satisfied with the explanations. What exactly did you find lacking in those explanations?
You'll have to be a bit more specific. What kind of?
So, for example, like in the HUD punishment, right? So like, well, like chopping a thief's hand off, like if you are in a robber, right? If a thief steals something, you chop his hand off in an Islamic state.
Yeah.
As in, like, A, it's in an Islamic state, and B, it's what's his name? It's used as a deterrent of a punishment. Like people usually have this impression that like, oh no, how it's so inhuman, like, oh no. But like after hearing all that, like after reading the explanation on that, people usually conclude that like, hey, this makes sense. So what exactly, like, I guess this is a way too broad a question, but like what exactly about the explanations did you find unsatisfactory?
So we might distill that one down into basically saying, what do you further object to in chopping off a thief's hand in a short state as a form of deterrent?
As in, it's not just that, it's like everything. Like,
Okay, instead of that, I'll choose another example, but the fact that having premarital sex is punishable by lashes. Things like that. It's those kind of things I have found explanations for it. They were never satisfactory. They never, to me, justified proportional punishment. They justified violence towards what two consenting adults were doing with their own bodies that was not harming anyone in other ways. And obviously, justifications came here from left, right, and center for it. Like strong place. Family values are most important, so and so forth. These aren't justifications. It's a kind of like applying the critical thinking to a particular action. Also with the chopping of thieves' hands, yes, if they don't repent, then chop off their hands. That's not a justification either. Deterrence is, I think anybody studying criminal law, or like any law students over here, understand that deterrence is not a factor that prevents things from occurring, or capital punishment, and that's an extreme strategy. Instead, we want to educate people and use non-violence methods.
Alright, awesome. I might move it on to one question. Does anyone have a question for the MSA side? Any hands up? Alright, I will go. You've had your hand up very high, so I'll give it to you.
It's a good question. We were talking about criticism of Islam. I just want to ask, who decides what's criticism and what's mockery?
I think it's not necessarily like a black and white sort of rule. Like, I don't think there's like a, this is what you can and cannot do. But I think it just comes down to common sense. So if you're mocking, for example, poking fun at something just for the sake of like making cartoons on Facebook and getting some likes, right? I don't think there's some criticism happening over there, right? But if you're having those same criticisms in the form of a question or in the form of a paper, that's more, academically engaging. So I think it's just about knowing, for example, I wouldn't say certain things about someone's mother, right? But if I had certain objections to race, then I would, do it in a specific way. It's just about emotional intelligence.
Okay. So the way I understand it is that the criticism itself is valued. The only thing that determines whether it's you pay attention to the text is the way it's framed. Am I using the point here, or?
I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? It's basically
It's the way it's framed.
the common sense.
Agree, yes. The way to do it.
Did you want to expand it on Rafael, or we'll go on to another question?
No,
I don't want
can I have a
another
quick
question
follow-up
for
to
the
that?
Yeah, okay.
Just
Yeah.
a quick one.
Okay.
So, what about comedians? Are they allowed to make jokes on stage in a comedy context?
So my question would be, what's the purpose of that? Like, what's the objective behind those jokes? Is it just to have a laugh, or is it to raise certain points?
It could be both. I don't know.
If you think about it in the context of a comedy show, are the people coming to have, okay, I'm going to think deeply about these points being raised, or is it just have a good laugh?
Probably the latter, but probably the latter.
Okay, I think Zarwa's probably made a point there in the distinction between what's mockery and what's valid criticism. I'll get another hand up for a question for the MSA side, and I might throw it to one more for the US side. Can I get the dead center of me? Yeah.
So my question, first, thanks for talking, all of you guys, really engaging, really interesting. Question for Zarwa and Rafael. What do you think the other side tends to get wrong about Islam in regards to women and like the view of the LGBT community? And what are your views on that?
I'm the woman, so he's speaking on
Sorry, if I could get could you repeat that again? So you're saying, what do we think that the other side gets wrong when it comes to women, or
what does the general population get wrong about Islam with regards to the view of women and like the LGBT community, for example? Yeah.
Okay. In terms of what I think the other side gets wrong, I think a lot of it has to do with decontextualizing. So it's a matter of, okay, this is what the facts look like. Okay, there are 2 women and 1 man, for example, for testimony. Oh, that's unequal, that's not fair. Right, so I think that's not really looking at the context behind it. Why exactly is there more detail to it? And I don't really blame you guys to a certain level, because it does appear like that, especially in our context of increasing women's rights. But I think it just requires taking a more nuanced approach. Right? I think a good way to phrase it would be an intellectual humility, right? Trying to go out and seeking responses to these. Just recently, I read a paper about something about 2 women and 1 man in regards to testimony. It's something that I perhaps might not have known, but it's seeking those avenues, right, and seeing a more, taking a more intellectual stance with it. I think, again, a lot of it's decontextualization. With the LGBTQ community, we might be able to phrase our responses in response to the action, but we're not advocating for hate for a certain community, right? It's about what does the Islamic framework accept, what does not accept, and sticking to that, as opposed to pointing fingers at communities and individuals and hating those individuals. I think it was Sabeena's article that I read online. She was saying how she found hypocritical how certain people who do very questionable things also point fingers at certain communities, especially those sort of people, and then they hate them for it. Right? It's not necessarily the matter of hating people. It's about what actions do we not accept. And I think every system has that. Every system has things that they accept and they don't accept.
Right, awesome. Do you want to, I know you've said something out that one, do you want to put anything else on that? You good? Alright, we might finish off with one more question from the US side. I'll go to the gentleman dead center of me.
Yeah, okay. I think my question would be sort of topical at the moment. I know we have empirical truths and metaphorical truths. I'd just be interested to see from both sides, which one would you place more value on and why?
Metaphorical truths. Could you elaborate?
I could give an example. So, like, empirical truth to me might be that you don't necessarily need to respect every individual person equally because they don't have the same value in terms of maybe their assets or whatever. But metaphorical truth might be to respect everyone equally because that does provide a better outcome for the society.
So you're not talking in that specific, in terms of that specific example, but in general?
Yeah, just generally. And in terms of perhaps not literally using the faith or the story of faith and applying it in life.
I think, I'm not exactly sure what you're saying. Basically, I do know one thing though, and that is in the divine law, the Sharia, takes precedence of everything else. So if that satisfies your answer, then yeah, that's it really. We'll do it at the end of the day. Are you saying that if there was a clash between those two, what would I do? Or?
Yeah, just in terms of what you'd hold more value over, maybe perhaps it might be scientific, perhaps empirical facts.
Yeah.
And perhaps something that's not necessarily.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's what goes back to you saying it's very topical.
Yeah.
We don't believe there's really a clash between what is empirical and what is religious, and if there is, then we would certainly say that there's a problem with the kind of empiricism that you're using. I don't know if when I tell my story, I always ask people, at what point do you think I became irrational?
Yeah.
So I think that I was trying to be as empirical as I could that whole time. And the empirical thing to do in my view was accept that there was something greater than what I saw in my, like, than the material world. So that was, to me, an empirical truth. Perhaps I didn't use what our scientific means to calculate and measure, test and all that. But I still came to that conclusion, applying that method of what are my experiences, what are my senses telling me, how does that correlate with the knowledge that I have, and collating that, putting it all together, and then trying to, make sense of it. So yeah, does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Can I get one last question for the UA team? Is it applicable to the UA team? All right. Cool. Oh, sorry, double hands doesn't miss out.
So what was your name? Lisa. Lisa. Okay. So the first thing I want to say is that, like, my heart is really pumping now because I really, really ache for you, because I'm so sorry to hear about the experience that you had, especially coming from a convert and a woman myself. And I went through a similar situation to yourself, and I found truth, and I found peace, and I found happiness. And when you were talking about your experience, what I noticed was the things that were pushing you away from Islam were things like rulings or parts of Sharia law, or things that Muslims are supposed to do or say, or things like that. Is that correct? And what, I'm a bit nervous. For me, and I think the question that I wanted to ask you is, like, you don't agree with those things that they have to do, which is fine, but if you believed in an ultimate God, and he told you, do this, would you do it?
Okay.
If you believed first the belief of the existence of God, if like God came to you and he's like, I'm God, here I am, and you're like, oh, like
yeah, okay, well, I think we got pretty well.
So what I'm asking is, like,
if it was revealed to you that there was one true God and he did tell you to do something, would you do it?
Even if that conflicted with liberalism or any other human rights, universal human rights?
That's a very good question. I hadn't really thought about that. I feel like empathy to me is really, really important, and I value people's lives more than anything. And if there was a God telling me to kill someone, or to kill a homosexual or something like that, just something absolutely absurd, I don't think I'd be able to do it. Even if the punishment was hellfire, I really can't ever see myself just following everything that he says, because I really value my individuality and critical thinking, and I just don't like the idea of a divine power telling me what I should and shouldn't do. And everybody has different minds, different ways of thinking. If there really was a God, why wouldn't he create us the same? So then he would do everything that he wants. Why didn't he create us to do these things that he wants us to do if it was so structured? I think that's a really good question to all ask ourselves.
Can I just add to human rights? It's substantial.
It's substantial. Yeah. It's substantial.
Can I ask, why do you guys believe it's substantial?
What is your basis for
what is substantial? Why do you guys believe in human rights? Why is it an objective source of morality for you? Because it was literally made up 70 years ago by some European powers after some devastating world wars. And the people who drafted the UN Commission of Human Rights, they were the most racist people. If you look into it, Charles Malik, he was a Zionist. He was killing thousands of Palestinians, and he supported it. So it's not an objective source of morality like you think it is. And the United States has like more than 50% veto power on the UN. So they literally control what human rights is. For example, the Rwandan genocide, as in, where was human rights then? The UN countries did literally nothing to prevent it, as in they didn't go, because it was considered not important to them. Another example, the Serbian massacre, there was no intervention because they considered it unimportant. As in, weren't human rights being violated then, or now the Rohingya genocide that's currently taking place, as in, these are all human rights abuses, but nobody says anything about them. As in, the Western powers don't adhere to their standard of this is human rights, we need to be helping these people, as in it's literally all political. You say human rights is an objective standard, but it's not, it's just made up in the past 70 years. If you go 100
Can we
years...
finish with a question?
Yeah, if you go 100 years, just 30 years before that, the world was sort of schematized into Europeans are superior, brown people lesser intellect, black people the lowest. As in, that's how they viewed the world. As in, these are the people that made human rights just 30 years later. And the same stereotypes still lead through to today. As in, the structures of the world haven't changed, so why do you believe in human rights?
Juicy.
Basically, going back to that, you're just saying that people who created these human rights, they're not good people to begin with. Why are you listening to them? I could use the same exact question asking you why do you believe in Muhammad after he had sex with a 6-year-old, married his grandma, so on and so forth. It's just basically proving up a point here that it's just...
As in, do you think human rights is actual source of morality then? As in, do you subscribe to it fully?
Human rights, even though people don't carry it out always, they still stand there. It's the people who are not implementing it, but the rule still stands. The same way that you would apply it over here, that if domestic people still, if domestic violence still persists and people are abusing their spouses over here, that still doesn't change the law that allows it illegal, that it's illegal, people are just not following it correctly. So it's like, these are two conflicting ideals.
I'm just saying you don't have any objective claim to a morality that's higher than religion because it's literally made up in the past several decades.
I might put this to the MSA side respond because there seem to be some fairly strong objections to those statements, and then we'll try to wrap things up. No, this is responding to that statement.
Yeah, I think that's something that we would all agree that we observe in narratives portrayed by people who've often left the faith is that they build it on this sort of strawman argument where they have they claim that this is what the movement says. Even right now in our conversation, there's just so many things when it comes to apostasy, cutting hands, claim to be straight as well. Yeah, everything. There's just so many, misrepresentations, and I wish we had the time in the world to actually go through each of them, right? But we don't, and it's really unfortunate because that's what, a lot of you might, take away as your understanding. So, again, it's really a matter of being intellectually sincere and actually going into these issues as opposed to making, very, sweeping statements. I think that's the most important thing.
Exactly, as in she didn't respond to me.
Rafael, do you want
She just fell back in the stereotypes that
we're going to do a substitution, 89th minute. Tactic. Come down, come down. The power of the bench, Pun intended. So, no, I suppose that really boils down everything that has been discussed today and where we come from. We come from two completely different ideas of what morality constitutes. And so, it comes down to then boiling down, obviously, the way we siphon the dialogue is to how do we decide which standard for morality is the correct and best standard for morality. And then that's the question that obviously through my very presence on this side of the panel I have answered, and through your presence over there you have answered, and inshallah we can continue this discussion for quite a bit longer.
We certainly can. Alright guys, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you.